I wear a lot of hats as Attorney General. I have so many different clients, and the statutes are the ones that determine whether I can or cannot do certain things. And I'm just following the law. I'm just complying with the law and doing what the statutes say that we should do. I think, unfortunately, in the past, we didn't have such a robust investigation and analysis and enforcement of the law here in this office.
So to make that very clear, you support the legislature having its own attorney in the future?
I do, and I did when I was a legislator, and I continue to do it. But there are valid issues when they come to me and they say that they want to write a piece of legislation and they just want to know, for example, whether they need to put it in the Constitution or in a statute, when it deals with some of the agencies that are created in the Constitution. That's a very valid question for the Attorney General, is, the best way to draft this is to put it in the Constitution versus the statute. But to determine whether something's constitutional or not, they're just as capable as I am to determine whether something's constitutional, and their lawyers should be capable of doing that.
Moving on to federal lawsuits, what's your philosophy on which lawsuits to sign on to?
So we get tens of lawsuits every week that people ask us to sign on to, and we don't sign on to all of them. I think what I look at is whether we think the federal government in some way is usurping the powers or the sovereignty of the state of Idaho, and if we think it's something that's important to the state of Idaho, if it's something that has a direct correlation to the issues that Idaho is dealing with. Just today, I had a list of 8 cases where we were asked by different states to join in the lawsuits, and I think we signed on to 4 out of the 8. So, I don't sign on to every single one. And as you know, I think there's been some maybe misleading statements out there. When we participate in a lot of these lawsuits, there's very little work that our office, if it's another Attorney General's office that is leading the charge, our job is just to read the briefs and make sure that we agree with the arguments. A couple of the cases today were cases that maybe I agreed with what they wanted, but I didn't agree with the argument that they were making. So we said, no, we're not going to join that lawsuit. But it doesn't take a whole lot of effort or work for the state. Now, there are other efforts where we have actually been leading the fight, and that means that my Solicitor General's office then is involved quite actively in those cases.
I'm curious the reason for signing on to the recent Voting Rights Act amicus brief supporting an 8th Circuit decision that says private groups and individuals can't sue under Section 2 of the Act that protects against racial discrimination in voting and redistricting. That decision currently affects only the 8th District. We're not in the 8th District. I don't believe Idaho has ever had a Voting Rights Act case. Why get involved in that one specifically?
Because that one has a bigger national profile that actually leads to things that could affect the state of Idaho. The Voting Rights Act and any kind of voting litigation affects every single state individually, even if we have not had litigation in our state. So that's an issue that I feel is compelling for the state of Idaho, because whatever is decided in that case will have national ramifications. For example, the composition of the House and the Senate, who the President of the United States is. All those things are very important, that even though they don't have a direct correlation to Idaho, because we're probably never going to be sued, I hope, on these issues. I hope I'm not inviting people to do that now. But the result of that litigation will directly affect the state of Idaho.
Moving outside of the Attorney General's office, you're the former chairman of the Idaho Republican Party. How do you feel about the direction and the state of the party right now?
I always laugh when I hear the media and people outside just talking about how the Idaho Republican Party is divided. They're always talking about how the Idaho Republican Party is divided. When I was a freshman legislator, if people remember, I was actually the one who helped take out the current chairman at the time of the Idaho Republican Party. I have fought with leadership in my party. It's always funny when people accuse me of being partisan, because I'm probably the least partisan person. I have fought my party probably more often than I have fought the other party on a lot of these issues. There's always a tension in the party because we have such a supermajority in the state of Idaho that the real fights happen between the conservatives and the more establishment members of the Republican Party. I think that's in some instances maybe a luxury that we have because we have a supermajority. If we had a closer majority, I think there would be fewer of those fights. But I always think it's healthy. I think it's healthy for a party to be trying to address the issues that they perceive. And I sometimes see my friends who are conservative taking things a little bit too far, and I think you see things happen where it ratchets back to a more rational decision or opinion. But I think this tension is always going to happen in the state of Idaho, and I don't think there's anything unusual about it. What I do think it's a little bit ironic is when people say that the party wants to have Republican legislators that are following what the party wants, and somehow that's objectionable, but they have no problem with groups like IACI or the Idaho Statesman or others telling legislators what they want to see from legislators. I think it's healthy. I think if you're going to say that you're going to be a Republican, you should explain what kind of Republican you are. It doesn't mean that we should kick you out of the party. I don't agree with that. But you should always explain what kind of Republican you are.
I do remember a certain 2014 state convention that
Yes.
you chaired that was a little divisive
It was
as well.
very divisive,
Absolutely.
yes. And I survived it.
We all survived.
Yes.